Romantic love is great, and there are obvious reasons why it exists. What's less obvious is why those giddy feelings of love can sometimes get a bit unstable. Why do some of us get so massively, comprehensively intoxicated with other people that it feels like an addiction? Why do we apparently have a mechanism for runaway romantic obsession built into our brains? In short, why does limerence exist? Hi, my name is Tom Bellamy. I'm a neuroscientist and writer and author of the book Smitten. I blog all about limerence at livingwithlimerence.com. And for those that don't know the term, limerence is an altered state of mind of profound romantic infatuation. It's well described as addiction to another person. But why on earth does it exist? What value does involuntary obsessive desire for another person have? Well, the answers lie in the way that our brains work and in our evolutionary history. Starting at the very beginning, limerence is obviously linked to reproduction, as, well, most limerents want to mate with their limerent objects. Now, it's also been observed that the typical duration of a limerence episode that leads to a sexual relationship is in the sort of 18 to 24 month range. And that coincides with the time window for having a baby and raising it through the most vulnerable stage of infancy. But limerence clearly isn't essential for reproduction, and people that never experience limerence have children successfully. In fact, you could make a very persuasive argument that they have an advantage. They don't go completely loopy over their partner, and so they can make better choices. So if limerence isn't necessary, why does it exist? The brain is a system of systems that's been cobbled together and refined through evolutionary history. It isn't engineered or rationally designed. Several different brain systems are involved in romantic love and limerence, principally the arousal system, the reward system, and the bonding system. And these systems certainly interact with one another, but they can also act independently. They create drives that contribute to love and limerence, but those drives just push us to behave in a certain way. They aren't a well-coordinated team. Now, the three main drives are lust, attraction, and attachment. Lust is primarily driven by activation of the hypothalamus and the amygdala, and it links erotic cues to arousal and reward. Now, it's a fundamental drive that can easily be triggered independently of any affection or a desire to bond. Attraction is more about desire and admiration for a particular person. It's more discriminating than lust, and it's not just about that sort of animal desire. Same-sex attraction and attraction to people who are past their reproductive age also shows that attraction is a desire that still operates even when baby making is impossible. Finally, attachment is about bonding. This is that sense of emotional intimacy, the closeness and affinity for another person. In romantic love, bonding can follow lust and attraction, but it isn't inevitable by any means. We can feel deep bonds of affection for people we feel no sexual desire for. Attachment also takes time to develop. It's built through closeness, unlike the more instinctive effects of lust and attraction. Now, what's obvious from these details is that evolution has gifted us with parallel drives that contribute different benefits for reproduction. Lust makes us want to mate. Attraction helps us select desirable partners, and attachment helps us form lasting pair bonds. Sometimes these drives work together harmoniously, but not always. Sometimes things can go wrong. In limerence, a specific combination of drives leads to a state of intense infatuation. Co-activation of the reward and the bonding systems in the brain imprints a specific person as the primary source of reward, and it's usually a heady brew of erotic, euphoric, and emotional reward. That's a very powerful association, and under the wrong conditions, it can become a little too powerful. So the reward system can be driven into an overactive state. The wanting urge encoded by dopamine becomes sensitized. At the same time, feedback control from the executive brain, the orbitofrontal cortex specifically, is weakened. It becomes desensitized. This is a state of addiction. One reward becomes the dominant force in life and other rewards pale in comparison. So you feel an irresistible desire for your limerent object, and in fact you don't even want to resist. This capacity for some rewards to tip over into addiction is well documented, and there are other behavioral addictions that have essentially the same basis in the brain. So gambling is the best validated, but addiction to pornography or shopping or gaming and many others have also been proposed. Beyond addiction, there are actually lots of other examples of how the systems of the brain can be driven into these unstable states. So scientists have long known about the existence of what are called supernormal stimuli. So these are artificial stimuli that can drive brains into overactive states. So classic examples of supernormal stimuli are gull chicks pecking furiously at a painted stick instead of a beak, birds neglecting their own eggs to sort of brood on gaudy porcelain eggs, or male butterflies mating urgently with paper decoys rather than with female butterflies. So unfortunately, evolved systems can have instabilities, imperfections, inefficiencies built in. They can go haywire if they're driven too strongly by a supernormal stimulus. A limerent object could be seen as a kind of romantic supernormal stimulus. They can drive your romantic reward response into a state of person addiction. Okay, so that's the how of limerence when it comes to the mechanics of the brain, but that still leaves the question unanswered about why that instability exists. Is it just a curious defect or vulnerability, or might it actually have some reproductive value? Well, fundamentally, limerence is a drive that promotes pair bonding. It's a desire to form a special connection with one other person. It excludes others. And humans are unusual amongst primates in using pair bonding as a reproductive strategy. Why humans have that tendency remains a contentious debate, but social monogamy is an effective way of linking reproduction to child survival. It promotes what's been termed fitness interdependence, where mutual support improves the odds of offspring surviving and thriving. It also improves the odds of reproduction actually occurring, or at least conception occurring. We have this idea that men will sow their wild oats indiscriminately because it maximizes their chance of reproduction. But that's not actually true in practice. Women do not broadcast their fertility in the same way as, say, female chimpanzees and estrus, who have engorged genitalia. Random opportunistic mating in humans is not very likely to result in conception. Two partners staying together and mating regularly has much higher odds of success. Pair bonding is advantageous from the perspective of both conception and child development. It makes sense that it would be a stable trait, and limerence promotes pair bonding. It's useful. Now, as a last note at this point, it's worth mentioning that none of these evolutionary arguments mean that opportunistic mating outside of the pair bond isn't an even more effective strategy. Infidelity is commonly observed in socially monogamous species. It's those independent drives of lust and attachment causing trouble again. A final thought about limerence from the perspective of evolution is that sexual selection is another important force, and that can lead to all sorts of wacky outcomes. Anytime lots of males compete to impress females, things can get a bit out of hand. Perhaps the most famous example of this principle is the peacock's tail. So peahens select for males who are able to demonstrate their fitness with a wildly extravagant display. Now, this squandering of effort is often explained by what's known as the handicap principle. So showcasing an absurd burden as proof of superior health or genetic quality. Now, alternatively, it could just be another example of a runaway system instability. So females respond to impressive displays, and that leads to an evolutionary arms race that runs out of control. And regardless of what the true selection mechanism is, I think limerence could fit into this framework. Limerence is an extreme drive to pair bond. It is an extravagant devotion to another person, an ostentatious commitment, a peacock's tale of loyalty. Once the milkmaid is limerent for the farm boy, no prince could sway her. Once the billionaire playboy is limerent for the waitress, not even a supermodel could turn his head. Adoration that profound signals a mate who can be relied upon to commit for long enough to secure the safety of your offspring, of your genes. It's only one strategy for securing reproduction in a complex world with both limerence and non-limerence looking for love, but it does make sense. Limerence is a supernormal reward, a hypersensitive drive for bonding, signaling a commitment so fierce it defies reason. It's not just a crush. If you've enjoyed this video, I think you'll also like this one on the factors that drive limerence from an exhilarating thrill into an exhausting addiction. Thanks for watching, subscribe if you'd like more, and I'll see you next time.